Good morning, everyone. I'm Rebecca Siegel of the UK Sky Networks and a board member of Network. And I'm delighted to welcome you all here this morning for your masterclass with Gary Glasberg. And let me introduce you to David Jenkinson, your moderator today. He's the Managing Director and Chief Executive Editor-in-Chief of C21 Media.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I hope you all had a very early night. I'm sure you all did. We're going to have a really fantastic chat with Gary this morning. You know, NCIS has proved to be a real phenomenon over the years, and so to find out what makes that show sustain, I think is sort of fundamental to programming, not just in Canada and the US, but around the world. So I'm looking forward, Gary, to hearing what makes you tick and how that affects the show. What I'd like to do is sort of start by saying we want to keep it fairly open, so if you do have a question at any time, just put your hand up. It's a good opportunity to ask the questions that you don't have a chance to put to someone like Gary too often. So do interrupt at any time. Thanks. Like someone's looking. We'll keep it interrupted. Yes, please. So let's start off. You have, correct me if I'm wrong, 71 episodes as executive producer and 18 episodes as co-exec producer under your belt, probably more by now.
I've never thought about it that way, but that sounds about right.
That's some good time in the cockpit. But I want to go back to how you started and got into this whole business, just as a bit of a recap, because I think it's important to trace that career path to where you ended up with NCIS. What got you interested in television in the first place?
I'm a bit of an oddity. There are many ways, no specific way to get to the job that I have at the moment. I went to film school in New York, NYU. I got out and worked as an assistant to a couple of prominent movie directors, Jamie Brooks and Alan Pakula. And then I moved west, and while I was working for Brooks, got the itch to write. And Sam Simon, who created The Simpsons, said to me that he had started writing Fat Albert back in the day. And he said, Gary, you should write cartoons. And I got into the animation world and did that for a number of years first, and then decided that I wanted to change my direction and reinvented myself and started writing specs, and then before I knew it, I was in the drama business.
So what was the big break?
The big break was a 13-episode commitment. It was UPN, yeah, that's what it was called. UPN's first drama at the time. It was a Dick Wolf show called Swift Justice. And it came and went in 9 episodes. And it was good. But met some terrific people and got my foot in the door, and here I am.
Cool. I'm just going to move that map a bit lower. So, yeah, that's
very good.
And previously you worked on The Mentalist, Shark, Bones, Crossing Jordan. Just sort of briefly take us a brushstroke across those shows and how they differed.
Sure. I met Tim Crane, who created Crossing Jordan and Heroes, and Tim brought me on to Jordan when it was first starting. And that was an interesting time because CSI was underway. The networks were all trying to do their version of a crime show. And what made Jordan a little bit different is that it had some humor to it. And we sat, and it was an interesting group of people. It was myself, it was Damon Lindelof, it was Tim, it was Ian Peterman, who's on Blue Bloods now. It was a really fantastic group of writers. And we knew there was something there because you were able to sort of have some fun with these people and then end up in the Boston coroner's office. And we all sat around and said, you know, this is interesting. We can intercut and have some play with this. And I think it was actually indicative in many ways of why NCIS works as well as it does. But did 3 years of Jordan and then moved on from there. And that was my first crime show. Excuse me for 1 second. That was my first crime show. And then it sort of blossomed, and I moved into a position where I was being brought in specifically for that type of program. So after Jordan, I did a very short-lived John Wells show called The Evidence. It's amazing when you work on the shows and you get really invested in them, and then for click. And you know, you put everything. That was a show that actually shot. Oh, I think we were partially in San Francisco and then in Vancouver as well.
Do you know why they don't work?
Well, at the time you sort of have a sense, but you're in denial, so you don't want to accept it. But you find yourself sitting in the room and you're pounding your head against the wall trying to come up with stories, and then you look at each other and you say, "My God, we're talking about episode 3," and so it's a bit of a challenge. But that was an instance where another show that just didn't click. Went from there to Bones in season 1. Worked with Hart Hansen, who's Canadian, and did a couple of seasons with Hart, and then moved from there to Shark. And along the way, whether it's because of my personality or whatever you want to read into it, I sort of developed a bit of a reputation as, you know, when things are having some issues, I was brought in to kind of smooth things out on occasion. So I guess this is me at angry, you know. So when I do get a little flustered, people notice.
But you're really angry.
Yeah, that's it. So, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that was the reputation that sort of developed, and then I just sort of kept moving from there.
And how did you come into NCIS? What was the move there?
The situation there was that Shane Brennan was working on NCIS, had Los Angeles picked up, and needed some assistance, and was looking to bring people in. I initially met with him to work on LA. And then I got a phone call after we had our meeting. I got a phone call at 10 o'clock that night from Shane. And he said, "Hey, I have an idea. How would you like to work on the original show?" And honestly, at the time, I had seen a handful of episodes, but I wasn't, you know, overly up to date on my NCIS.
Were you a fan?
I was a fan. I was curious. You know, you have a show with Mark Harmon and a terrific group of people, and it's working, and you want to understand why it's working.
Yeah.
And then this opportunity came up, and I said, you know, I thought it was a good idea. Let's give it a shot.
So this is 5 years ago?
5 years ago.
5 years ago.
I'm going into my 5th year.
So when you arrived on the show, it clearly had a heritage and it defined what it was as a brand, very much a crime procedural, really, to be debated. But what did you think was good about it, and what did you want to change when you arrived on the scene? How cautious did you tread?
Oh my. You know, when you enter a show that's up and running like that and is doing well and has a history of succeeding, your goal isn't really to come in and change. Your goal is to just keep it going. And that was certainly what I wanted to do and how I wanted to support the show and Shane at the time. And that's what I did. You walk into an environment with a group of writers and producers and actors that certainly know their way around the show at that point. So the last thing you're going to do is come in and say, well, let's adjust this or let's change that. The goal was just to keep it on course.
So you sat back, you took a look around, you figured it out for a while, and then you moved it on. Tell me what were the first things that you did to change it, to bring it up to date a little more?
Well, that didn't really kick in, you know, any sort of influence that I had didn't kick in until later. But the one thing that I think I brought to it early on, and at least in the stories that I wanted to write right off the bat, was to really come at things from a character standpoint. When Don Belsario created the show, at the very beginning, it was much more sort of procedural and police-oriented right from the get-go. And Don was very clever in sort of holding back some of the character elements of those people, of our characters, and it gave me and others the opportunity to peel back those layers later on. So here we are, 11 seasons into the show, and in truth, yeah, there are things that you've learned about Tony DiNozzo and Gibbs and all of them, but I can do a lot more, you know, and it was very beneficial holding back at the beginnings to get us to where we are now.
I heard it said that you don't think of NCIS as a procedural. If you don't think of it as a procedural, what do you think of it as?
I think of it as a character drama. You know, and that's sort of the way that we're approaching when we sit down and we break these stories now. Unlike, I think, the way things were at the beginning of the run of the show, we don't sit down and say, let's do a crime story about X. We very much approach it from the standpoint of, let's do a story about Gibbs and his dad, and then we come in the back door with the crime. We find a crime that parallels that character story well. And in many ways, unless it's a very specific story that we're trying to tackle, a specific case, in many ways, the crime story takes a backseat. And you know, there are times when a crime story, you know, out of a 38 or a 40 beat script, the crime story will only encompass 6 or 8 beats. And it's a bit of a magic act to pull that off, because a lot of times people aren't aware of it.
So let's just talk about that, excuse me, creative process and breaking an episode and the writer's room. Because I know it doesn't work in a traditional writer's room way at NCIS. Could you take us through an episode, how you break it, or what sort of things are in your head while that process is taking shape?
People are often very surprised about the fact that we don't have a traditional room. We all come from shows where we spent days, weeks, months in a room. There are people on the show that have been writing for a very long time. People come to NCIS, they don't leave. If I put them all in a room together every day, they'll kill each other. And it's not because of animosity. It's about the fact that they all write the show really well, but they all write the show very differently. So I can't expect one writer to dictate to the other how to tell an NCIS episode. So instead, I basically become the room. And what happens is they all work in their individual offices or in smaller groups. And then I bounce from office to office. And we do it that way. It puts a little bit more on me in terms of what's going on in my head, because I become the conduit between connective tissue. But I find with this group that it works better.
So how many of them are there? And do they each have responsibility for characters, story arcs?
No, we don't break it down that way. There are 8 altogether. Like I said, some of us have now worked together for a long time. It's an extraordinary range of expertise. I've got Frank Cardia and George Skank, the executive producers, who have literally been doing television for 40 years. And then I have some new writers, Gina Monreal, who I brought in a couple of years ago, and she's just been a prize. So it's a terrific mix. But that's, you know, I love bringing new people into a show like this, because you're getting some fresh perspective. You're getting a sense of how to keep it going. You know, we're 11 seasons in, and I think I was telling, I mentioned the other day, we were talking, you go off on hiatus. We get a very limited hiatus these days, but we're doing 24 episodes. But you go off on hiatus, and you come back, and my biggest fear when I sit down with the group, and we do sit down in the room first thing when we get there, and I look around, and there's always a moment when I'm afraid that they're not going to have any ideas. And I always say that when I start to feel that, maybe that's the beginning of the end of the run. And once again, season 11, we sit down, and it's as if we never left. And the ideas are flowing, and they just keep coming, and let's do this with Gibbs, let's do this with Tony. And everyone is having a good time, and it's a big sigh of relief when you lean back and say, wow, we're not stopping yet.
Let's look back not across the whole time that we've been there, but to the sort of last few seasons, and perhaps get some atmosphere about what you tried to do, let's say in the last couple of seasons.
Yeah.
So we can talk about the character development or where you start from. Let's say 3 seasons ago, what was your challenge and how did you evolve through the season? and what hurdles did you overcome along the way, and then we'll bring it more up to date and see where we're going next.
Well, and you always sit down at the beginning of a season and say, we didn't do a relationship, I'll just take you through some examples. We didn't do a relationship story with Gibbs in a while. Maybe it's time for Gibbs to date. Maybe it's time for him to have a girlfriend. That causes, by the way, and specific to that kind of storyline, huge uproar and issues because so many people love Mark and love Gibbs, and no woman is right. So I sort of can't win, honestly, when it comes to finding an actress for Mark. But we have a good time with it. The most recent one, was a friend of his. Jamie Lee Curtis came on and did a nice little arc for us, and that was fun for everybody. And she fit right in with the group, and we had a good time. But no, we sit down at the beginning of the season and we really look and say, who should we service this season? What do we want to see? What character do we want to focus on? Specific to, we do so little, on this show more than others, I was going to say so little serialized arcing, but there are character arcs to this show, and we do take people places that they haven't been before, and I know that the Tony Zero relationship will probably come up, so I'll hold off on that for a second. But we do sort of step back and say, where are we going with this part of their personal life? Do we need to have something new and significant happen in the office? Should we introduce a new agent? We try to bring new agents in periodically. We had Ned Dornick, played by Matt Jones, who's now going to be on a new CBS show. Mother. Mom, thank you. Thank you, Tessa.
Paying attention.
Matt's on that, and he came in and actually played a gay agent, which was fun for us, and took things in a different direction and opened things up a little bit. And
Careful with those nice.
well, that's right. But no, that was unique for us, and we had a good time with it, and we did it very responsibly. So I was pleased with that.
And how do you test these new arcs, or these new characters, or these new storylines? Do you take a moment? How do you gauge the feedback, and then what do you do about it if it's working or not working?
Well, when you have 17 million Facebook friends, you pay attention. I try not to go on too much because literally it'll make me crazy if I do too much. But we have an extraordinary fan base and a very, very dedicated fan base, and we take that relationship very seriously and we pay attention to it. So when things come up, we pay attention. I can't necessarily say that it's always the creative direction that we want to go in, and ultimately that's our decision. But we pay attention to what people have to say.
Do you have somebody specifically monitoring social media and producing weekly, daily reports on feedback?
No. I wish it was that organized. We have a couple of people who sort of pay attention.
Did you see that?
We individually pay attention. You get an email that gets forwarded from one person to another, and suddenly you say, "Oh, that's an interesting thought."
Yeah. Okay. What have been the most impactful moments in the show's history for the time that you've been there? What has really worked well, and what lessons can drama generally take away from those moments?
I'll say one of the things that I've actually learned in going back and studying some of Don's decision making story-wise is surprising people, not being afraid to take a risk. We have that luxury because the show is the success that it is. So, it's okay to try something now and again. But as with the famous Kate episode, season ender, you put a couple of characters, your regulars, up on a rooftop, and the next thing you know, there's a funny story, but the next thing you know, you're attaching a blood squib to the back of someone's head, and you haven't told them until that morning. I wasn't there for that. That was before me. But
we need to talk.
That story is sort of taken on folklore status. But you try things and you do things. This season, last spring, I went to Rocky Carroll, who plays Director Vance, and I said to Rocky, I have an idea. I'd like to kill off Eli W. and at the same time kill your wife. And Rocky just stared at me for a second and smiled. And I said, I really do think that it's going to take your character in a new direction and open things up and give you something new and interesting to play. And Rocky was very intrigued, and the goal was to kind of keep that under wraps and really surprise people with it. And one of the things, you target these sweeps periods in November and February, and here I was saying, let's, in talking to the studio and the network, when should we do this? And I'm thinking maybe right after the holidays. And it wasn't February, and it wasn't November. It was January 4th or something like that. And the thought was, people have done their traveling and they're home and they're snowed in their houses. And while they're sitting there and getting ready to go to work the next day, let's throw something that they don't see coming at them. And it did. It worked. It rejuvenated. It got everybody going again. We were back on track. So.
The show plays at 8 p.m. on CBS, attracting a broad audience. What's the challenge of that? It obviously helps the ratings. You're also doing very, very well. But what challenges does it pose you? And does it ever frustrate you that you can't go darker or deeper? Or
it's hard with a crime show. There are times when you'd like to not necessarily be more graphic. And we do deal with that sometimes. We have an extraordinary special effects department. When we step into the morgue, we very often have a body splayed open in some unfortunate manner. There are times when you'd like to be a little more specific in terms of that, but we've learned that you don't have to see it. It's the Hitchcock adage of just talking about it. It's amazing what a gurgle and a sound can do. So we try to hide the ball when it comes to things like that as much as we can. And then you've got David McCallum hovering over a body.
Has there been some communication that you've had to utilize in order to, vocabulary you have to learn to understand in order to communicate ideas that you were hoping to bring to the show?
Over the years, you start to understand, key approaches to what makes a show like this function. You know that in a 7-day prep, you better figure out what you're going to need body-wise, for instance, because the effects people need a certain amount of time to pull that off and to build it for you if you need a cadaver. There are little things that you pick up along the way. I don't mean to be morbid about the whole thing, but that's what we do. I don't have a producing director on this show. I have an extraordinary producing entity that handles the production of things. Mark Horowitz is an executive producer of the show. Mark Schill's really supportive people who have been doing this for a long time, and certainly know what's required for us to make an episode. We have a pool of directors who we have used over and over and over again. The cast is very comfortable with them. They know the show inside out. Director Dennis Smith, Tony Warmby. Dennis just finished his 50th episode of our show. For some people, that's the entire run of the series. Dennis has done 50 of them. When you have directors that understand the positives and the limitations of a specific television show, you rely on them to help you through that process. But there's an open communication that starts from the first day of prep all the way through location scouts and production meetings and everything else. Rather to go back to the original question, do I have a producing director? I have 7 producing directors. That's basically it.
Thank you.
follow-up question? Cool. Anyone else? You've got sort of a history of throwing in sort of story cookies, tidbits of things that are coming up, and you sort of see little traces of things that in early episodes in a series that evolve into bigger stories later on, and you sort of tease things out. Could you tell us how you develop those little story arcs across a season, what you do in the early episodes, how you see things, and how they come back later.
That's unique to NCIS. I haven't had the opportunity to do that on other shows. This show allows you to layer in tiny little threads of things. At the end of season 10, there's a line or an exchange of dialogue that McGee has been dating a woman named Delilah. I promise you there will be more of Delilah. I can throw things into this show, unlike other series, literally with one line of dialogue, and then revisit it 6 episodes later. And this fan base latches onto things so quickly that I know that it's okay to come back. And in other series, I couldn't do that. So we literally, very often in a season opener, I'll write the script that I know I want to write, and then I'll go back and I'll layer in what we refer to as these cookies. And very often the cookies get more attention than the storyline does. But
can you give us some examples of other things that have worked in previous series where you've done that effectively?
I can't do. Honestly, no. It's unique to this show.
I mean, in other episodes.
Oh, other episodes of NCIS.
Yeah. In examples of how that's been done well, and what sort of temperature.
I mean, for instance, before we introduced, I'll go way back. Before we introduced Robert Wagner as Tony's dad, there was a series of phone calls where Tony would just hang up the phone or storm in and say, my dad did this or my dad did that. And we'd never met his father, but we knew that, he has a little bit of layering to do. And all it took was a line or two to get the audience thinking and focused, so that ultimately when they did hear that Robert Wagner was going to do the show, we had built it up to a certain point. This season, season 10 with Ziva, we got through the death of her dad. We established that, that she would like revenge, but then we step back and we do 7 episodes of what I view as sort of traditional episodes of the show, self-contained episodes of the show. Throughout those episodes, there were little tiny moments that we put in where Ziva is at the computer doing something, and then Gibbs walks up and looks over her shoulder and she turns the computer off. We never saw what was on the screen. We just know that there's something that she's keeping from her. So it's little things like that we're able to just sort of keep a storyline alive. And then when we feel like it's appropriate to come back to it, then we do.
So do you think that's one of the devices that you've used across seasons that have actually sustained? Because the fan base they're looking for this, aren't they? There's a whole format that's working behind the scenes that you're a regular fan.
Absolutely. I'm not only writing episodes for the general public. I know that we've got this extraordinary group of fans that are watching as well, and I know that they're watching shows multiple times. I'm fascinated with all the talk in attending other people's Q&As and meetings about video on demand. We have an audience that watches the show broadcast first, and then they either DVR it or they download it, and they watch it over and over and over again. And very often I'll say that I'm layering in some of those little lines and those cookies that we were referring to, that I'm layering those in specifically because I know that you may miss it on the first go-around, but you'll catch it on the second or the third.
Can you walk us through an average season in terms of how you think about each of the episodes and how those episodes work together? Do you do things in the first few episodes that are different? Do you do things in the middle, and then how do you build to the end?
There's a little bit of a structure to a season that I've been doing since I've been there. We tend to set up some kind of cliffhanger at the end of the prior season. We come back in the new season, episode 1, and that's usually entirely about whatever was left. I left people very confused intentionally at the end of season 10. I have a lot of ground to cover when I leave here. I've got some explaining to do, some writing to do. But I promise, and I've said this before, that all of that will be covered in the season opener, and we'll go back through flashbacks and other things and see that progression that led up to that moment that we left in season 10. After I set everything up in the first episode, we usually try to get back to what I view as a more traditional sort of progression of episodes, self-contained storylines, crimes that are solved in one episode versus 2 or 3. And we usually, at our network, we usually have to do 10 in a row right out of the gate. So we get those stories up and running and put together and built. And we try to bring back some familiar guest stars and faces that people want to see. So we'll do those 10 in a row. That'll get us through the November sweeps period. We usually do a holiday-related episode, take a little break, come back, and then it progresses usually with some sort of significant bang after the holidays. Another run of sort of traditional episodes of the show, and then we're gearing up for the finale arc.
Cool.
Yeah.
Anyone have a question they'd like to ask Gary? Could you just hang on for a mic so we can get it down?
Just yell.
Get it on the tape.
Hi, Gary. Gay McDonald. I'm with the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and I'm with the revenue side.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Your show must be an absolute dream come true for the people in your sales side of things. And again, congratulations on that. We work a lot in the branded content side of the industry, and I'm wondering, what do you do? Talk to us about any kind of brand integrations and things like that, and do you do that sort of stuff? How are you, I think all of those things would be coming into you. I know you have others around the room, but when we start to do that with clients into some of our shows, I know it's really, really delicate, and so a lot of the things that we do for our clients are seamless, and you may not always see them. But we definitely are going to be executive producers, and the writers have to include it in the shows. And I'm just wondering how you feel about that, or are you creating other things for them also?
We do very little of it, honestly. I'd be open to doing more at times, but I'll say that it's tricky. It's tricky in that we're very conscious of trying to make it feel organic to the episode and organic to the show. I have an issue, the cast has an issue, you don't want to hold up something and say, buy me. So very often we'll wait until there's an opportunity where we feel like we can do it in a way where it feels organic and real, and we understand why we're looking at something. There are times, and I hope, I don't think I've ever received a correspondence where someone said, I caught that. We feel pretty confident when we do it. We put a lot of time and effort and thought into it. But like I said, it doesn't happen very often. It's very infrequent.
Again, give us an example of what it has happened.
There have been, with our show, it's easy to do things that are computer related. So there have been, a handful of computer related things that we've done. But other than that, my understanding of it is there are things that are set up that aren't really, showcased that way. It's just we have arrangements with certain car companies and things like that, and those are the cars that our characters drive. But really, for my show, that's sort of as significant as we get.
Cool.
Nice to hear you say you'd be open to more. Love that. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, so looking back across the 5 years, what have been your best moments? What have been the highlights on the series, and what have been the worst moments? Is there anything you really regret doing?
No, I'll start with the latter. I really don't have any regrets on this show. We've been very deliberate in how we sort of move things forward. It's been a joy. You've got a show. You come into a show in its 7th season when I arrive, and there's a part of you that's saying, can't go on that much longer. It's just the natural arc of the life of a television show. and then you start to see something in a program like NCIS, and you see a dedication of the people that watch it, and you see characters that are still evolving, and you say, wait a minute, I think we can squeeze this out for another year or two. And then you get a year or two down the road, and suddenly you say, oh, we're not done yet. And then there's this life that exists, and suddenly we're season 11, and I end season 10 with the highest ratings that we've ever had. So no, I don't feel like there's anything that we should have done differently. I would find myself saying, give me some proof of what we should have done differently.
So the play to characters has clearly worked out.
In this instance, it has, yes.
And certainly, you mentioned the relationship with Tony and Ziva, which has become a sort of a phenomenon in its own right. Did that accidentally happen, or did you go looking for it? And for those who don't know, could you just give us a little backstory?
Yeah, I have two characters on the show, Tony Donoso and Ziva David. Ziva came in season 2, replaced Kate, and there was an immediate chemistry between the two of them as agents. It's a very complicated thing to have a personal relationship in a government agency, in the real world. And we have a tremendous relationship with the U.S. military, with the Navy, and with the real NCIS. And we really do make an effort. There's creative license that we take now and again, but we really do try and make an effort to sort of approach many things appropriately. And so the Ziva-Tony relationship is something that we felt the need to be delicate about. They're coworkers first and foremost. There's an attraction clearly that exists. There's an emotional connection. There's a psychological connection between the two of them. It's been fun, but in classic Nick and Nora, David and Maddie scenarios, you want to sort of dole this out little by little. You want to savor it. A little goes a long way. We have fans that are very, very passionate about this relationship. I know that they would love nothing more than to see it leap to a place where they're together. That could happen.
Could it happen?
It could happen, absolutely. But I also feel like, isn't the dance that two people do, isn't that fun? You don't want to get there too fast. You might be a little disappointed. So let's savor it and let's enjoy it and let's have fun with it and get there when the time is right.
Absolutely. Let's talk about cliffhangers, because cliffhangers at the end of season 10, just tell us what you did with that.
Season 10 was tricky. People have come up to me and said that we had multiple enders in season 10. They're not wrong. We had from Ziva's father's death to there was a car accident between Tony and Ziva, and those were all things where people I think watched and said, hey, wait a minute, it's not the end of the season. What are they going to do now? Then I introduced Colin Hanks' character as an investigator for the Department of Defense, who basically came in and was taking a look at NCIS as a whole and said, hey, these people are accomplishing things, but they're doing it in ways that maybe they shouldn't be, and he decided to sort of go after them. That was a slightly different type of arc for us at the end of the season, but I felt like because we had done such action-oriented arcs earlier in the season, that it would be fun to do something a little different. At the very end, Gibbs is given this opportunity to sort of wipe the slate clean, but in doing that, he takes on a very complex and dangerous case. That, and then seeing him with a sniper rifle at the end of the episode leaves us wondering all summer long, what is that case? And that's what I'll get into in the opener.
So without giving too much away, what can we expect to see in the next season?
I hope a lot more of what we've been doing. We'll certainly pick up right where we left off. We're already talking about Tony-specific episodes and things that we'd like to do with Ziva and sort of going through each character and Vance and the relationship between Palmer and Ducky, and it's you find yourself going through and saying, hey, we haven't seen this guest star in a while, let's do this, or there's a mini arc that we'd like to approach at some point. We've got some fun stuff in store.
Audiences are changing, the distribution patterns of entertainment are changing. We're all very aware at the moment about the impact of over-the-top services, binging on series through devices like iPads and video on demand. How is that affecting? How's the commercial change in entertainment impacting what you do at the front end of developing a series? Is there any change? Does it affect the way you budget, tell stories, think about distribution, or is it business as usual?
No, I think it's sort of business as usual for us. I can't say that, that's true. I mean, I certainly know a lot of friends and showrunners and other programs that they're approaching things differently. With this show, like I said, it seems that the pattern is watch the show. I mean, there's an interesting sort of pattern that exists related to, and theories related to the success of the show. Some people think that it's discovered on cable. In the U.S., it's played on USA in rerun. Some people have discovered the show in rerun and then come back to CBS to watch the original episodes. They watch the original episodes, they like the original episodes, and then they download them, or or wait for them to rerun or DVR them. I've been traveling on vacation with my family, and had someone knew what I did and came up to me and said that they buy the box set, and they sit down and they watch 3 a day until they run out. They do the binge viewing. It seems across the board that everyone is sort of approaching things in the viewing of the show in different ways. And it's not just, very often the age range of my audience will come up at times. It's not just, adult viewers. I've got college kids that come up and tell me that they watch the show and they run back to the dorm and watch it in between classes. So it's interesting.
And internationally, of course, it's a great success. It's in more than 200 territories, probably 230 now. I don't know exactly, but it's certainly done well internationally. I mean, that's fair to say.
It's fantastic.
Does that inform how you create the show as well? Are you thinking ever about how international audiences will come to it?
I do. One of the interesting things about doing NCIS is that there's an NCIS office in every major port in the country, in the world, sorry. So there is an international aspect to the kinds of storylines that we do, to how they get involved, to their interaction with other international agencies. It's very much a part of the storytelling. And we've done a handful. We did a Berlin episode this season. We've sent the team multiple times to Italy. Those episodes are fun. I wish I could say that we're shooting in Italy, but beautiful Valencia, California.
How long can the series run?
I think it's got a tremendous amount of life still in it. Like I said, we come in every day, and I wait for those moments when we're starting to run out of ideas, and I don't see that in sight. So we'll keep it going as long as we can. I'm very, very blessed to have a cast, Mark Harmon and the rest of the group, that people on the show genuinely like to come to work. You've got a group of seasoned actors and a crew, producers and writers that have all been doing this for a while. And when you come across a project like this that functions the way this show does and runs as well as it does, you enjoy getting in the car and getting up in the morning. And we're happy to be there, and we'll keep doing it as long as we can.
And what do you think the world's drama writers and showrunners can learn from NCIS? What are the lessons that the world needs to take away from how to do this and make it successfully over 10 seasons, 11 seasons?
Well, it's a tricky environment right now because you've got tremendous critical acclaim being brought to all kinds of cable programming. And then you've got a show like us, which we have a tremendous viewing audience, success with that very large viewing audience. The only thing I'd say is don't count the broadcast show out. We're doing some really good work and we're getting some really good people involved, and I think it shows in the way that people come to our show and stay with our show. And we're happy to deliver, quality television to the people that are invested in NCIS.
Well, thanks for coming and talking with us about it this morning, and long may it sustain. Ladies and gentlemen, Gary Glasberg.